The whole world is holding its breath. Jerusalem has just witnessed an event that forces humanity to ask, is the end truly drawing near? Jerusalem has never been just a dot on the map. It is the crossroads of history, the stage of prophecy, and the place where heaven and earth have collided more than once. But what happened there recently has shaken even those who do not usually pay attention to biblical warnings. There was no long build-up, no gradual storm front on the radar. One moment, the city stood under ordinary skies, and the next, the heavens opened with a violence that few could comprehend. Flash floods ripped through ancient streets, giant hailstones smashed roofs and vehicles, and in just a handful of minutes, familiar neighborhoods were scared beyond recognition. Officials quickly labeled it a rare extreme weather event, something unusual but still explainable. Yet many on the ground felt something deeper, an eerie precision in the timing, the location, and the scale of the destruction that left them asking, was this only nature, or a warning that the end is nearer than we think? If you don't want to miss what might be the most important signs of our time, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, and leave a like so this message reaches more people who need to see it. Jerusalem has endured sieges, fires, and earthquakes. But what unsettled people that day was not destruction. It was speed. There was no gradual build-up, no slow sense of danger. One moment, life moved as usual. Next, the city was overwhelmed. Witnesses described the sky changing color so quickly that phone cameras struggled to adjust. The light flattened. The air thickened. Clouds seemed to gather from nowhere, releasing rain with an intensity rarely seen in the region. Within minutes, water rose from ankles to knees to doorsteps. What frightened people was not only the flooding itself, but how little time there was to react. Residents who had lived in Jerusalem for decades spoke quietly afterward. They had seen storms before. They had seen flooding. But this felt different, not necessarily stronger, faster, more focused. As if the city had been singled out rather than caught in a broad weather system. Then came the hail. At first, it sounded harmless, a tapping on stone and metal. Seconds later, it became a barrage. Balconies rattled, windows cracked, cars dented under repeated blows. Streets turned white, not with snow, but with ice that arrived violently and without mercy. In some areas, rooftops leaked for the first time in living memory. The storm passed as abruptly as it had arrived. Jerusalem remained standing. No single catastrophic collapse. No final devastation. And yet, something essential had shifted. The city felt exposed. Vulnerable. As if it had been reminded publicly that endurance does not equal immunity. People searched for meaning in the aftermath. Some accepted the scientific explanations and moved on. Others did not dismiss them, but sensed that explanation alone was not the point. Because the question echoing through conversations was no longer, what happened? It was, why now? While debris was cleared above ground, something far stranger was unfolding below. Beneath the surface near the western wall, workers were performing routine reinforcement in ancient tunnels, a task carried out countless times before. These stones had withstood centuries of pressure, earthquakes, and human intervention. Cracks were not unusual. Settling was expected. Nothing about the work suggested significance, until a sound interrupted the routine. It was subtle at first, a low, steady tone, barely audible. Conversations stopped. Tools were lowered. Workers listened. The sound did not echo like footsteps or machinery. It did not rise or fall with movement. Investigations followed. Ventilation was checked. Nearby traffic was ruled out. No mechanical source could be identified. Instruments recorded a stable signal. unaffected by temperature or pressure. Official language described it cautiously: unusual resonance, subterranean acoustics, natural stone behavior. But for those present, the experience felt anything but neutral. One worker described it as standing outside a stadium before a major event, unable to see anyone, yet sensing presence. Another said the stone felt warm to the touch, though measurements showed no heat source. Some dismissed their own reactions, afraid of sounding foolish. Others spoke quietly among themselves, unsettled by the persistence of the sound. When recordings leaked beyond the site, debate ignited. Engineers and geologists offered theories. Online discussions exploded. Skeptics mocked the reactions. Believers whispered possibilities they barely dared articulate. Words like awakening, preparation, and knocking began circulating not as declarations, but as questions. Jerusalem's stones had always been silent witnesses to history. Now, for the first time in living memory, people wondered if those stones were doing more than remembering. Almost simultaneously, reports of other anomalies surfaced, scattered at first, easy to dismiss individually. In a sealed underground chamber long believed to be lifeless, signs of growth appeared: roots, moss, vegetation where no light, air, or moisture should reasonably support life. Biologists struggled to explain the phenomenon without hesitation. Above ground, witnesses reported sudden changes in daylight skies, dimming at midday despite clear forecasts, light taking on an unfamiliar hue that felt heavy rather than stormy. Not darkness, but distortion. Then came the night. From different parts of the city, people described bands of blue light drifting slowly across the sky. Not fireworks, not aircraft, not known atmospheric effects. Alongside the lights came deep, resonant sounds, horn-like, distant, echoing. No ceremonies were scheduled, no gatherings explained the noise. Short videos appeared online, grainy, inconclusive, yet persistent enough to unsettle. And on one particularly quiet night, several witnesses claimed to hear the unmistakable sound of a shofar echoing across the Temple Mount, despite no one being present to blow it. Taken alone, each report could be dismissed. Together, they formed a sequence that made dismissal more difficult. Floods, hail, cracks in ancient stone, sounds from within the earth, life where there should be none, light without forecast, a horn without a player. A phrase began circulating quietly: Jerusalem is waking up, not in a poetic sense, but in a structural, symbolic one. Jerusalem is unique in that every event there is amplified by history. A crack in stone elsewhere is just damage. In Jerusalem, it becomes a question. A storm elsewhere is weather. In Jerusalem, it becomes a sign not necessarily divine, but unavoidable. People began to watch more closely, to listen more carefully, to connect dots they might have ignored before. Importantly, no authoritative voice stepped forward to declare these events proof of the end times. No consensus formed. Scientists continued to analyze data. Officials urged calm. Religious leaders advised caution. And yet, the unease remained. Because the real disturbance was not the events themselves, it was the pattern. The sense that these were not chaotic or random, but ordered, sequential, as if something long dormant had begun to move. For skeptics, the events challenged assumptions about predictability and control. For believers, they stirred memories of ancient warnings and long-held expectations. For many in between, they raised a quieter, more personal question. If a city believed to be eternal can feel fragile, what does that say about the rest of the world? Jerusalem has always functioned like a mirror. People see in it what they already carry within themselves: faith, doubt, fear, hope. And now, as images of flooded streets, cracked stones, strange lights, and unexplained sounds circulate globally, that mirror feels sharper. No one claims certainty. No one can honestly say they know what comes next. But one thing is undeniable. After these events, Jerusalem no longer feels like a static monument to the past. It feels active, responsive, as if history itself has leaned forward. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is this: none of what happened resembled an ending. There was no final collapse, no singular catastrophe, no definitive conclusion. Instead, there were signals, interruptions, movements that felt like the opening notes of a larger composition. For many watching closely, the sense is not that the story is concluding, but that it is transitioning. A threshold, not a finale. And if that is true, then the question humanity faces is not, is this the end? It is, are we paying attention? Because if these events were merely the first movements, the subtle shifts before something greater, then what follows may demand far more than explanation. It may demand discernment. And this was only the beginning. What came next in the skies above Jerusalem would leave even skeptics searching for words. By the time the waters receded, the hail melted, the instruments were shut down, and the last strange light faded from the Jerusalem sky, the city looked on the surface much the same. The walls still stood. The holy sites still drew visitors. Daily routines resumed. Markets reopened. News cycles moved on to other headlines. And yet, for many who had seen and heard what happened, something would not go back to normal. It wasn't just the damage, the cracked tiles, the dented cars, the flooded streets. It was the sense that the familiar fabric of reality had been tugged at in a way that no one could fully undo. In private conversations, in messages sent late at night, in hushed talks over coffee, or in quiet corners near places of prayer, people admitted something they did not always say out loud. It feels like the city is trying to tell us something. No one could agree on what. But few could shake the feeling that these events, taken together, were not just isolated misfortunes. They felt directional, not in the sense of a clear map, but like a compass needle that had suddenly begun to twitch, refusing to point where it always had before. For some, the conclusion was simple. The climate is changing, systems are strained, and Jerusalem, like everywhere else, is feeling the effects. For others, that explanation, while true on one level, seemed to miss the weight of where all this was happening and the order in which it unfolded. Flood, hail, stone, sound, growth, light, horn, light. One incident after another, above and below,